In 2025, if you want to solve the catastrophic housing crisis in India, you do not need to look at poured concrete.
Right.
And you certainly don't need steel. You actually need top-tier American software developers.
Yeah.
And, well, you need dirt.
It sounds like an absolute paradox, honestly. I mean, you have the pinnacle of digital abstraction on one side and the most grounded, literal earth on the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And yet today, we're looking at a set of source materials that argues these two worlds shouldn't just meet. They have to permanently merge if we want to survive the next century of urbanization.
Absolutely.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a really fascinating series of writings, pitches, and manifestos published in April 2026.
Right, by an entrepreneur named Paramendra Kumar Bhagat.
Yes, and the overarching theme here is a staggeringly ambitious proposal. It's designed to solve the urban housing deficit across India and Nepal.
So our mission for this deep dive is to dissect what the sources call a revolutionary hybrid business model.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. We are looking at a blueprint that attempts to reverse engineer the aggressive, profit-driven scaling of a United States PropTech startup.
PropTech being property technology, right?
Exactly, yeah. So they want to take that startup energy and hardwire it directly into the pure social impact of a nonprofit.
Wow.
The ultimate goal here is to finance and build millions of climate-resilient mud and bamboo homes for the absolute poorest citizens in South Asia.
Because on the surface, merging ruthless venture capitalism with ancient mud architecture feels like a complete contradiction.
Oh, totally.
We are so conditioned to think that profit and purpose live in separate silos,
Yeah.
But as we dig into Bhagat's writings, it becomes clear we're looking at an attempt to prove they can become the exact same engine.
Yeah, that's the core of it.
So if you're listening to this and wondering how on earth an app verifies poverty or like how a Silicon Valley boardroom builds a mud wall, stick with us because the mechanics are wildly inventive.
The stakes could not be higher here. We aren't just examining a novel way to incorporate a startup.
Right.
We are looking at a potential mechanism to correct a massive systemic market failure, one that is leaving millions exposed to the elements.
And to understand the cure, we really have to break down the scale of the disease first.
Yeah, we do.
The sources lay out the housing deficit in India, and the numbers are just grim. Like, as of 2025, urban India is facing a shortfall of 9.4 million affordable homes.
It's staggering.
And if current trends hold, that gap is projected to balloon to 30 million units by 2030.
30 million units. I mean, to put that in perspective for you, that is the equivalent of needing to build a new home for every single resident of Texas in the next 5 years.
Just to break even.
Right, just to break even. But what is truly crucial to understand here is the specific nature of this deficit. It is a calculated failure of the traditional market.
How so?
Well, the sources point out that in India's top metros, the share of genuinely affordable new homes has absolutely plummeted.
And they define affordable as under 50 lakh rupees, right?
Yes, which is roughly $60,000. In 2018, about 52% of new builds fell into that affordable bracket. Today, it has collapsed to a mere 17%.
Wow. Meaning 83% of the new housing being built is deliberately geared towards the upper middle class and luxury markets.
Exactly.
The sources paint this very visceral picture, actually. Sprawling slums sitting cheek by jowl with gleaming half-empty high-rises.
It's a striking image.
It really is. It's the ultimate visual proof that traditional real estate markets simply cannot catch the people falling through the cracks. Even massive government initiatives struggle here.
Right, like the Prime Minister's housing scheme, PMAY.
Yeah. They just struggle to scale at the speed of human desperation.
And the underlying economics explain exactly why this happens. If you are a traditional for-profit developer, your fiduciary duty is to your investors,
Sure.
and they demand maximum return on capital. You only achieve those aggressive margins by building luxury apartments or commercial real estate.
Because the margins on affordable housing are just too thin.
Exactly. You simply cannot satisfy traditional venture capital by building low-margin affordable housing for marginalized communities. The unit economics do not support the required internal rate of return.
But then you have the nonprofits on the other side.
Right. On the flip side, traditional nonprofits, the organizations that actually want to build that housing, are constantly starving for capital.
They spend, like, half their energy writing grants just to keep the lights on.
Yeah, and they lack the technological sophistication to scale massively.
So we essentially have a fundamentally broken system. The venture capitalists have the money but the wrong incentives.
Yep.
And the nonprofits have the right incentives but no money. But the source material introduces a catalyst here. a real-world proof of concept that inspired this entire hybrid model.
This is where it gets really interesting.
It comes from a quiet experiment in Kathmandu, Nepal, launched by an entrepreneur named Jay Saw. It's called the Kalki Sena Drive.
The Kalki Sena Drive is honestly a masterclass in rewiring incentive.
On its face, it's just a standard ride-hailing app.
Right. Right, like an Uber or a Lyft.
But there's a massive structural twist. 100% of the profits from this app do not go to shareholders.
Not a single cent.
They go directly to building and operating 200 free medical clinics across Kathmandu. Now, I have to push back here for a second.
Go for it.
Because my immediate reaction reading this was total skepticism.
Yeah.
How is this actually different from a standard corporate charity initiative?
That's a fair question.
We've all seen the classic buy one, give one shoe company model, you know.
Right.
Or a massive corporation that pledges a fraction of its profits to a good cause. Isn't this just charity dressed up as a tech startup for good PR?
That is the natural assumption, yeah. But the structural purity of the Kalki Sena model is entirely different from typical corporate social responsibility.
How so?
Well, in a traditional corporate charity model, the primary fiduciary duty of the company is still to maximize shareholder value.
Right, the shareholders come first.
Always. The charity is just an afterthought. It's an expense on the balance sheet, a tax write-off, or honestly just a marketing tool to drive more sales.
Okay, I see that.
What's fascinating here is that the Kalki Sena model legally flips that hierarchy. The public good, the 200 clinics, they are the sole shareholder.
Wow, okay.
There is no parasitic layer of outside equity investors demanding quarterly dividends that dilute the mission.
So the business itself still runs as a cutthroat, highly efficient tech venture.
Absolutely.
It's not asking for donations. It's competing against other ride-hailing giants on user experience, driver retention, and algorithm efficiency.
And that efficiency generates a surplus. But because there are no traditional shareholders extracting that surplus, every single rupee of profit flows directly into healthcare.
That is wild.
And the text outlines how this model is designed to scale across borders. Step 2 involves taking that Kathmandu operational blueprint and expanding it to Delhi.
And to fuel this, they raised roughly $1 million from Indian origin investors based in the U.S.
Yes.
Wait. If they're raising $1 million from U.S. investors, those investors obviously want their money back, right? Doesn't that reintroduce the exact parasitic layer we just talked about?
It introduces capital, yes, but with a strict contractual cap.
Oh, I see.
The investors get their principal returned plus a predefined capped profit percentage. It functions a lot more like revenue-based financing or a highly structured debt instrument rather than open-ended equity.
So they don't just own it forever.
Exactly. Once that cap is hit and the investors are bought out, 100% of the ongoing infinite profits from the Delhi operation flow into free education and health projects within Delhi.
That is incredibly clever. And then comes step 3, which is where the ambition just goes completely off the charts.
Oh, yeah, it's huge.
The plan is to take this tech platform to the United States market, compete purely for profit in U.S. dollars, and channel those massive earnings back into funding social initiatives in India and Nepal.
They are essentially constructing a global arbitrage machine.
That's exactly what it is.
They are utilizing the immense profit pools and high consumer spending of the U.S. tech market to generate capital, and then they're deploying that capital in geographies where the dollar stretches incredibly far for social impact.
Which brings us to the absolute core of today's deep dive. Fagat sees that a local ride-hailing app can fund medical clinics using this structure.
Right.
The logical leap he makes is, well, how do we reverse engineer this specific corporate architecture to solve the 30 million home deficit?
Yes.
How do we use American software profits to build millions of homes in India?
This is what the sources call the reverse play, and it hinges entirely on launching a brand new PropTech startup headquartered right in the United States.
And the sources detail this U.S. startup's operations. It is definitely not a charity.
No, not at all.
It is building cutting-edge, highly profitable real estate tools. We are talking about AI-powered rental platforms that match tenants with units.
Modular construction management software, too.
Right. Designed to slash build times for American developers. And prop financing apps to unlock micro mortgages.
It aggressively recruits top AI talent. It raises venture capital. It chases a billion-dollar unicorn valuation. It looks, walks, and talks exactly like a high-growth Silicon Valley venture.
Until you look at the cap table.
Exactly. The structural secret that changes the DNA of the company is what the sources call the 20% rule.
According to the blueprint, 20% of this U.S. company is owned outright by a nonprofit foundation.
Yes.
And it goes further. The founders and the early employees are given the option to split their own equity into two distinct streams.
This is the genius part.
Right. So they retain the voting rights, meaning they maintain total control to run the company aggressively. They make rapid product decisions and avoid getting bogged down by a slow-moving, risk-averse nonprofit board.
Right. They keep the agility of a startup.
But they legally commit to donating the economic upside of their shares to that foundation. So the dividends, the massive payouts from an IPO or an acquisition, all of that goes to the foundation.
This specific mechanism tackles what is often called the founder's dilemma in the social impact space. Well, brilliant engineers and operators who genuinely want to solve systemic global problems have historically had to make a really painful choice.
Like either make money or do good.
Basically, do I build a multi-billion-dollar tech empire and perhaps do philanthropy later in life? Or do I start a nonprofit today and constantly struggle for resources, leaving a much smaller footprint?
And this solves that.
This dual-class equity structure says you can do both simultaneously.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though.
Sure, go ahead.
If I am a top-tier machine learning engineer and I have offers from Google, Meta, and this new PropTech startup, why am I taking a job here?
It's a valid question.
Traditional startups attract talent by dangling the golden carrot of stock options. Like, come work 80-hour weeks and when we IPO, you'll be a millionaire.
Right.
If the founders and early employees are funneling their economic upside to a foundation, how do they attract the ruthless, highly skilled talent required to actually build a unicorn?
It is a phenomenal question, and it really speaks to the changing psychology of the modern workforce.
Alice.
The text implies a reliance on a blend of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. First off, you still pay highly competitive base salaries. This is a well-funded U.S. C Corp. It's not a charity.
Okay, so the base pay is good.
Exactly. Second, the 20% foundation ownership and the founder's pledge don't necessarily preclude offering standard equity packages to rank-and-file engineers who prefer traditional compensation.
Oh, that makes sense.
But more importantly, there is a growing subset of elite talent that is utterly disillusioned with optimizing ad-click algorithms.
Yeah, people want meaning in their work.
Exactly. Well, if you offer a brilliant engineer the chance to build a technologically fascinating AI product, and you prove to them that their code is literally putting roofs over the heads of the poorest people on Earth, that becomes an unparalleled recruiting tool.
So it's essentially creating a Formula One race car. That is the U.S. PropTech company. The engineering is tuned to perfection. It is aggressively driven, and it is designed to outpace every other car on the track. But instead of the prize money going to wealthy team owners, the winnings are literally hardwired to power the electrical grid of a developing city.
That is a brilliant visual.
The faster the car drives, the more the lights turn on.
Because the execution pipeline outlined in the sources relies entirely on that hardwired transmission line. The nonprofit foundation takes those massive U.S. tech profits generated in dollars, and it uses them to seed what the text calls super apps in India and Nepal.
We've seen the super app model dominate in places like China with WeChat, right? Or Southeast Asia with Grab.
Yep, exactly.
So the foundation takes the ride-hailing concept and evolves it to include food delivery, digital payments, logistics, literally everything.
Correct. They build applications that embed themselves deeply into the daily economic life of a massive population.
Okay.
These Indian and Nepali super app operations run on that exact same 100% profits to impact rule as the original Kalki Sena Drive.
So the foundation now has a dual stream of revenue.
Yeah, exactly. The U.S. corporate dividends and the local super app profits, and they funnel this immense capital pool directly into the housing pipeline.
We're talking about acquiring land for affordable development.
Yes. Subsidizing modular home construction, creating rental guarantee programs, all of it.
But whenever you talk about injecting millions of dollars into real estate in developing economies, the immediate red flag for any listener has to be corruption.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge issue.
How do you prevent local middlemen, bureaucrats, or regional politicians from siphoning off the funds? Like, how do you guarantee that the homes funded by U.S. tech money actually end up sheltering the absolute poorest families rather than the middle class or whoever has the right political connections.
The sources address this vulnerability directly with a highly sophisticated, tech-driven targeting system.
Okay.
The foundation would never rely on easily manipulated paperweight lists or local municipal surveys. Those are notoriously prone to bribery.
So what do they use?
Instead, it integrates directly with existing national biometric infrastructures. In India, that means tapping into Aadhaar.
Aadhaar is the world's largest biometric ID system, right? Over 1 billion people are enrolled.
Yes, the scale is honestly staggering. It relies on multimodal biometric verification,
Which means,
specifically fingerprints and iris scans. The Indian government already uses Aadhaar for direct benefit transfers.
right,
When the government issues a subsidy for cooking gas or agricultural support, the money goes directly into the Aadhaar-linked bank account of the verified individual.
so it mathematically bypasses the local politician who used to hand out physical cash or grain in exchange for votes.
Exactly. And the PropTech Foundation proposes building an API layer, an Aadhaar-linked app to cross-check housing eligibility in real time.
And the text is very specific about who gets this housing. They are targeting the absolute bottom of the pyramid.
Yes.
Landless families, families currently living in what are called kucha homes.
Which means temporary, fragile shelters made of unbaked mud, thatch, or scrap materials.
Right. They're looking for people belonging to the economically weaker sections with verified incomes well below the poverty line, specifically those who have never received government housing assistance before.
The biometric verification seals the leaks in the pipeline. If a family in rural Bihar applies, the app pings the national database. It verifies their identity via a fingerprint or iris scan on a smartphone.
It cross-references their property and income status.
Yep. And if they qualify, they enter the housing pipeline. Zero middlemen.
That's incredible. What about Nepal?
Nepal, while smaller, could mirror this exact precision, targeting using its own rolling national ID system and poverty mapping data, focusing initially on the most marginalized, disaster-prone districts like Jajarko and Akham.
Okay, so let's summarize where we are. We have established the financial engine, the high-speed Formula One car in the U.S. generating dollars.
Right.
We've established the transmission line, the foundation, and the super apps. And we have the targeting system, the biometric verification, to ensure the poorest actually get the help.
Yeah.
But this brings us to the most surprising pivot in the entire deep dive.
This is my favorite part.
With all this cutting-edge Silicon Valley money and all this AI and biometric tech,
Yeah.
what exactly are we building?
Right.
We aren't using the tech money to pour high-tech concrete or 3D print synthetic polymers.
Yeah.
We are using it to dig up dirt.
This is the moment the blueprint transcends a standard tech pitch and becomes something truly revolutionary. The technology is not the material.
Okay.
The technology is merely the logistical engine utilized to scale the oldest, most reliable building material on Earth.
Mud.
We really need to pause and examine the case against concrete here.
We do.
Because if you drive through almost any rapidly developing city in the global south, progress is universally defined by cinder blocks, rebar, and poured cement.
Exactly.
To suggest building millions of homes out of mud sounds to a modern era like a massive step backward, why not just build millions of cheap concrete boxes for these people? Because in the specific geographies we're focusing on, and the sources use Bihar, India as the primary case study, concrete is an environmental, economic, and physiological disaster.
Really?
A disaster. Let's look at the climate. Bihar has a subtropical monsoon environment. We are talking about scorching pre-monsoon summers where temperatures routinely hit 45 degrees Celsius.
That is 113 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yes, and this is immediately followed by massive monsoon deluges and incredibly high suffocating humidity.
So what physically happens to a cheap, thin-walled concrete box in 113-degree heat?
It becomes a literal oven. This comes down to the thermal dynamics of cement. Concrete has high thermal conductivity but poor thermal mass in thin applications.
What does that mean in practical terms?
It absorbs the brutal daytime heat rapidly and transfers it inside. If you build a concrete home for a marginalized family that cannot afford air conditioning or the electricity to run it, you are condemning them to a structure that bakes during the day.
Oh, man.
And then it continues to radiate that trapped heat into the living space all night long. It is a severe health hazard.
And what about the humidity and floods?
Furthermore, rigid concrete is terrible at handling the shifting soils of river floodplains. It cracks, and concrete is entirely non-breathable.
which means
which means in that high monsoon humidity, moisture gets trapped inside, leading to severe toxic mold infestations that cause chronic respiratory issues.
not to mention the macro-environmental impact, too.
Right.
The text highlights that cement production is one of the largest single emitters of CO2 on the planet. It's responsible for roughly 8% of global carbon emissions.
To combat this, the sources introduce a profoundly powerful cultural analogy. They refer to this earthen architecture movement as khadi for buildings.
Khadi. That refers to the hand-spun, hand-woven cotton cloth, famously promoted by Mahatma Gandhi during the Indian independence movement, right?
Yes, exactly. Gandhi championed khadi not just as a fabric, but as a potent symbol of economic self-reliance and political resistance.
Right. It was a rejection of imported, expensive, mass-produced British textiles.
In favor of local labor utilizing local materials, it was white cotton to beat the Indian heat, woven by the people, for the people.
And Vagat is making the exact same argument for the built environment.
Precisely. Why import massive amounts of carbon-heavy, expensive, climate-inappropriate cement engineered by multinational corporations, especially when the literal ground beneath your feet can provide a superior zero-carbon return to roots?
It is a beautiful philosophical concept. But the sources don't just rely on romantic nostalgia, do they?
Not at all.
They break down the hard physical science of why mud is structurally and physiologically superior in this climate. Let's walk through the scientific benefits because they are incredibly compelling.
The first and arguably the most crucial benefit for human survival in these regions is thermal mass.
Okay, thermal mass.
If you build a thick earthen wall, it absorbs the daytime heat incredibly slowly. The specific heat capacity of dense mud means that while the sun is beating down outside at noon, the heat wave hasn't penetrated the wall yet.
So the interior stays shaded and cool.
Exactly. By the time the heat finally works its way through the thickness of the wall, it is nighttime. The outside air has cooled down, and the wall slowly releases that stored heat back into the cooler night air, rather than baking the inhabitants.
That's brilliant.
The sources cite data showing this natural thermal regulation keeps earthen interiors 5 to 10 degrees Celsius cooler than concrete, entirely without mechanical air conditioning.
5 to 10 degrees Celsius is massive.
Yeah.
During a severe heat wave, that is quite literally the difference between a comfortable afternoon and fatal heat stroke.
The second major scientific advantage is breathability, or vapor permeability. Mud walls naturally regulate humidity.
How does mud regulate humidity?
The clay particles actually absorb excess moisture from the indoor air during the muggy monsoon season, and then they slowly release it back into the room during the dry winter spells.
So it's basically breathing.
Yes. This dynamic breathing completely prevents the condensation and toxic mold that plagues poorly ventilated concrete slums.
That solves a huge health issue.
Third, we look at sustainability. Constructing with raw earth slashes the carbon footprint of a building by 80 to 90% compared to cement.
Wow.
You aren't mining limestone, transporting it hundreds of miles, and burning massive amounts of fossil fuels in kilns to calcinate it. You are simply digging up the earth on site.
And finally, there are the economics. The raw material, the soil is free or nearly free.
Right.
And instead of writing massive checks to multinational cement conglomerates, that U.S. PropTech money circulates within the poorest village economies.
Yes.
You are employing local village masons, local potters, and mobilizing women's self-help groups who have passed down these vernacular earthen techniques for generations.
It acts as an incredible economic multiplier. The capital doesn't just buy a physical asset. It acts as a localized stimulus package, paying marginalized people to rebuild their own communities using their own earth.
Okay, the scientific and economic case for dirt is ironclad. I get it. But if I'm listening to this, the phrase mud home still conjures up an image of something fragile, like maybe a crude hut that washes away in the rain.
That's a very common misconception.
To understand how this works at a scale of 30 million homes, we need to dive deep into the actual engineering. The sources detail 4 highly specific pillars of earthen architecture. Let's explore how these techniques solve different environmental challenges and, crucially, how American software is going to optimize them.
The beauty of these 4 techniques is that they offer a toolkit. Depending on the soil composition, the weather threats, and the available labor in a specific village, the builders can pivot to the most appropriate method.
Let's start with situations where you need massive structural strength and you have access to basic equipment. That brings us to rammed earth, or pies.
Rammed earth is one of the oldest and most durable construction methods in human history. Portions of the Great Wall of China and ancient Moroccan Kasbahs were built using rammed earth, and they're still standing centuries later.
That's wild. How did it work?
The mechanics involve taking moist subsoil. You want to strip away the organic topsoil and use the layer beneath. The ideal matrix, according to the text, is a mix of about 40% clay and 50 to 60% sand or gravel. You place this damp mix into rigid, temporary formwork, usually heavy wooden or metal molds.
And then comes the manual labor, right?
Exactly.
The text describes using heavy tampers or even pneumatic rammers if available to pound that soil down, compressing it layer by layer.
You are artificially accelerating geological time. You are compressing the soil down to 90 or 95% of its maximum density.
Wow.
When you unbolt and remove the formwork, you are left with a solid, monolithic, stone-like wall that can be up to 60 centimeters thick. It is incredibly durable, entirely fireproof, and if you want to make it resistant to the heavy monsoon rains, you can stabilize the mix.
How do you stabilize it?
By adding a tiny fraction of lime or cement, maybe 3 to 5%, the sources point to modern, multi-story rammed earth hospitals built in remote, rugged regions of Nepal, like Acham.
Right.
Because they utilize the excavated site soil rather than flying in materials via helicopter, this technique slashed total construction costs by 40%.
And this is where the U.S. PropTech integration happens, which is so cool. How does a local mason in Bihar know if the dirt under his feet has that perfect 40% clay ratio?
They usually wouldn't, just by looking.
Right. So the startup doesn't just send money, they send software. The blueprint envisions AI-powered smartphone apps. A mason takes a picture of a soil sample or inputs basic data from a cheap soil sensor.
Yes.
And the AI instantly analyzes the composition. It tells the mason the exact ratio of sand or lime they need to add to that specific patch of dirt to achieve maximum structural integrity.
It completely removes the guesswork. You're taking an ancestral technique that relied on generational intuition, and you are validating and optimizing it with artificial intelligence.
But what if a village is incredibly poor? What if they don't have the capital to buy or transport heavy wooden formwork for rammed earth?
Yeah.
How do they build?
That is exactly when they pivot to the second technique, adobe or mud bricks.
Adobe is perhaps the most universally recognized earthen technique. It fundamentally changes the process from monolithic pouring to manufacturing your own building blocks on-site.
The chemistry here relies on binding. You mix clay-rich soil with sand and water, but crucially, you add a fibrous material like straw or rice husks.
Why the straw?
The clay acts as the compressive glue, while the straw acts as a micro-reinforcement, providing the tensile strength to prevent the brick from cracking as it dries.
Oh, I see.
You press this thick paste into simple, cheap wooden molds, just a rectangular frame. You lift the frame away, and you leave the wet bricks in the sun to cure for 2 to 4 weeks.
What stands out to me here is the massive scalability and the community empowerment aspect. You don't need heavy tampers or complex formwork.
Exactly.
The sources specifically highlight women's self-help groups handling the Adobe brickmaking process. It transforms a construction project into a decentralized employment program. A group of women can manufacture thousands of bricks in a nearby field, sun-dry them, and sell them to the housing project.
It's brilliant for local economies.
And the economics are staggering. The text notes a basic 300-square-foot home built with Adobe costs a tiny fraction of a government-issued concrete unit.
And because you are laying individual bricks with mud mortar, you can easily build traditional, familiar housing shapes that perfectly regulate that extreme humidity we talked about.
But let's say a family has an irregular plot of land, or they want to build something more organic, maybe integrating their home into the landscape. This brings us to the third technique, which is cob, or layered mud. I find this one fascinating because it sounds incredibly sculptural.
It is entirely sculptural. The word cob actually derives from an Old English term meaning lump or loaf.
Okay.
The massive advantage of cob is that it requires absolutely zero formwork, no molds, and no pre-manufacturing of bricks. You take that same mixture of clay, sand, straw, and water, and you knead it, often by stomping on it with bare feet, until it forms stiff structural loaves.
And
Then you literally stack and compress these loaves by hand, building the wall up in continuous thick layers.
I liken it to living inside a piece of hand-sculpted organic pottery. Because you aren't constrained by rigid wooden molds or rectangular bricks, you can build beautifully curved walls that deflect wind, integrated mud benches, arched windows, all sculpted right as you go.
The high straw content in cob weaves the layers together, making it incredibly flexible and crack-resistant. And the modern tech twist proposed for Cobb is brilliant.
Tell me about it.
The U.S. startup could provide 3D spatial modeling apps on standard smartphones. A family could walk their plot of land, use the app's augmented reality to digitally sculpt their home to fit the exact contours of the site, or capture the shade of a specific tree.
That's amazing.
And the app calculates the structural loads, telling them exactly how thick to make the base and how many layers of cob they need to build it safely.
Which leads us to the fourth pillar. And this solves a very specific environmental threat. What happens if you are building in the floodplains of Bihar, where floodwaters might regularly inundate the lower half of the house?
You use wattle and daub.
Right. Wattle and daub.
It's a composite technique, and it operates on a different mechanical principle than the solid mass walls we just discussed. First, you build a structural frame, typically out of timber or sturdy bamboo.
Okay, so it has a skeleton.
Exactly. Then you weave a lattice of flexible branches, reeds, or split bamboo between the frame members. That woven grid is the wattle.
And the daub.
Finally, you plaster over this lattice on both sides with a daub mixture of mud, straw, and sometimes animal dung or lime to make it workable.
The sources specifically mention why this is useful in flood zones. It is incredibly lightweight and highly breathable.
Yes, you generally wouldn't use wattle and daub for the primary load-bearing walls of a heavy structure, but it is perfect for interior partitions or, crucially, the upper walls of a house built on stilts or a raised plinth in flood-prone areas.
Because it's easy to fix.
Exactly. Its resilience lies in its repairability. If a severe flood washes away the lower mud plaster, the structural timber frame and the woven wattle lattice remain completely intact. The homeowner doesn't lose their house.
They just replaster it.
They simply wait for the waters to recede, mix up a new batch of mud, and slap on a new coat of plaster.
Okay, so we have these 4 incredible earthen techniques in our toolkit. Rammed earth for monolithic strength, adobe for decentralized scaling, cob for sculptural flexibility, and wattle and daub for lightweight resilience.
Right.
They solve the heat, they slash the carbon emissions, they drop the cost to a fraction of concrete.
Right.
But here is where we hit a massive point of friction.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
I'm reading through these sources, nodding along with the mud architecture, but a glaring issue jumps out. Mud is fantastic in compression. If you stack a heavy wooden roof on a thick, rammed earth wall, the mud happily bears that downward weight.
Yes.
But mud has terrible tensile strength. It cannot stretch, pull, or bend without violently cracking. And both Bihar and Nepal sit in highly active seismic zones, specifically Zone 4V and Zone V.
Very active.
We are talking about the very real threat of catastrophic earthquakes. How on earth do unreinforced mud homes survive a magnitude 7.0 earthquake?
This is the critical engineering hurdle that makes or breaks the entire proposal. We have to look at the mechanics of a seismic event. During an earthquake, the ground doesn't just move up and down. It violently shifts laterally, back and forth.
Right.
These are shear forces. A rigid concrete building, if it is not heavily reinforced with an expensive grid of steel rebar, will simply snap under those shear forces and pancake, crushing everyone inside.
And mud would do the same thing.
Unreinforced mud walls suffer a similar fate. The lateral shaking causes the heavy walls to bulge outward, separate at the corners, and collapse. The standard modern answer is to import tons of steel rebar.
But the blueprint has a different answer.
The blueprint's answer is infinitely more elegant. The answer is bamboo.
The text refers to bamboo as nature's rebar.
And from a structural engineering standpoint, that is not an exaggeration. Bamboo is technically a grass, but its cellular structure is miraculous. If you look at bamboo under a microscope, it is packed with these dense vascular bundles, essentially microscopic, ultra-strong tubes wrapped in a natural polymer called lignin. It acts like naturally occurring fiberglass.
That's wild.
It grows abundantly and rapidly across the Gangetic Plains and the Himalayan foothills, making it incredibly cheap. And crucially, it is stronger in tension than steel by weight.
I really need to clarify that. Are we saying a stalk of bamboo can hold more tension than a steel rod?
By weight, yes. If you take a kilogram of steel and a kilogram of bamboo, the bamboo will withstand a greater pulling force before snapping.
Wow.
But its real superpower in an earthquake is its ductility, its ability to flex and deform without losing structural integrity. A rigid material fights the kinetic energy of the earthquake, and if the force is too great, it shatters. Bamboo dances with the earthquake.
That's a great way to put it.
It allows a structure to sway, absorb the kinetic energy of the seismic waves, and then spring back into its original position.
And this isn't just theoretical modeling, right?
No, not at all. The sources explicitly note that during the devastating 2015 earthquake in Nepal, numerous bamboo-reinforced earth buildings survived entirely intact, while adjacent, poorly reinforced concrete structures completely pancaked.
So the million-dollar question is, how does the foundation mechanically integrate this flexible bamboo into the rigid mud to create a composite material?
Right.
The sources do a deep dive into 4 specific reinforcement techniques to earthquake-proof these homes. First, we have vertical poles.
This is about anchoring the walls against shear forces. You take mature, thick bamboo poles, typically 8 to 12 centimeters in diameter, and you place them vertically at critical stress points, the corners of the house, framing the doors and windows, and spaced every meter or two along the length of the walls.
And how does that work with the mud?
Well, if you are building with rammed earth, you literally embed these poles right into the center of the mud as you tamp it down. If you are using adobe blocks or cob, you build the mud around the poles.
The text details drilling holes through the thickness of the mud wall and tying the inner and outer bamboo poles together with strong polypropylene string or galvanized wire.
Yes.
This essentially creates a flexible skeleton. The bamboo acts like a spine, allowing the heavy mud wall to safely flex up to 2 or 3% out of plumb during a tremor without failing, safely dissipating the seismic energy.
And here again, we see the PropTech integration. The foundation provides apps that use computer vision to scan photos of the locally harvested bamboo.
Computer vision.
Yeah, the app analyzes the thickness, estimates the species and age, and instantly calculates the optimal spacing for those vertical poles to guarantee seismic safety for that specific house design.
That is incredible. The second technique addresses the most common point of failure in unreinforced masonry. The walls bulging outward and separating. They call this solving the box effect, using horizontal bands and ring beams.
Imagine an unreinforced square building during an earthquake. As the ground shakes violently, the 4 independent walls tend to pull apart at the corners and fall outward like a house of cards.
Right, because there's nothing holding the corners together.
Exactly. To prevent this, you have to physically tie the tops and bottoms of the walls together so the entire house moves as a single, cohesive box. You achieve this by installing continuous horizontal bands of split bamboo at key levels, at the plinth base, right above the lintel of the doors and windows, and most importantly, at the roofline.
The ring beam.
Precisely. You securely lash thick bamboo poles together, overlapping the joints, to create a continuous, unbroken tension ring that runs along the very top of all 4 walls, locking them together.
And the text mentions shake table tests for this, right?
Yes. The sources mention extensive shake table tests where structural engineers build scale models and simulate severe earthquakes on motorized platforms in a lab. These tests definitively prove that these horizontal bamboo bands delay initial cracking and completely prevent the walls from collapsing outward.
The third technique gets even more granular, split bamboo mesh.
Instead of using whole, thick poles, you take the bamboo and split it lengthwise into thin, pliable strips, maybe 1 or 2 centimeters wide. Then, you weave these strips together to create flexible mats or grids.
Like weaving a basket.
Exactly. You embed this woven mesh directly horizontally inside the mud walls as you build them up, layer by layer.
I visualize this as an internal tensile grid hidden right inside the earth. It is the ultimate microscopic crack control system. If the mud wants to pull apart or shear during a violent tremor, the woven bamboo fibers embedded inside hold it tight.
Yes.
The text notes this is an adaptation of an ancient Indian technique, creating composite walls that possess the strength of steel that can bend.
And finally, we have to look at the roof. A heavy roof like poured concrete or thick ceramic tiles is deadly in an earthquake because it acts like a pendulum swinging at the top of the walls.
It'll just tear the walls down.
Exactly. The model proposes hybrid roofs and treatment. They construct lightweight roof trusses entirely out of bamboo. This lightweight roof structure sits securely on that bamboo ring beam. It can sway independently of the mud walls, drastically reducing the dynamic load on the structure.
But what about bugs? Termites?
Right. To solve the issue of termites and rot, which is the main drawback of organic materials, the bamboo is thoroughly treated before construction. The sources mention using traditional methods like smoking the bamboo over neem fires to crystallize the sugars, or using modern cheap chemical soaks like boric acid, which ensures the bamboo remains structurally sound for decades.
So stepping back, we now have the complete Vivid physical picture. We have a U.S. software company running lean and fast, funneling its massive dollar profits into a nonprofit foundation.
Yeah.
The foundation bypasses local corruption by using national biometric data to pinpoint the absolute poorest families. And then, using AI logistics and super apps, it funds those local communities to dig up their own earth, mix it with straw, ram it into walls, and reinforce it with highly engineered, seismically sound grids of treated bamboo.
It is hypermodern digital technology serving ultra-traditional, climate-resilient earthen architecture.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps the most pragmatic segment of this deep dive. This is a theoretically beautiful, airtight blueprint. But ideas are cheap, execution is everything. How does Bhagat propose actually getting this massive machine off the ground?
Right. How do you go from a series of ambitious blog posts in April 2026 to moving millions of dollars across borders and physically building millions of homes?
Exact.
The sources actually detailed the exact phased pitch the author made. He didn't just write a white paper. He pitched this directly to billionaire venture capitalist Mark Cuban on Twitter.
Wait, on Twitter.
Yes. The text lays out a very deliberate, classic startup funding timeline. It is designed to de-risk the investment at each stage. Stage 1 asks for a mere $100,000 seed for a 3-month ideation phase, essentially paying for the legal structuring and the core architectural design.
Okay, that's modest.
Stage 2 requests $2 million to build the core digital team over the next 3 months. This buys the U.S. developers who will build the super app prototypes and the Aadhaar API integrations.
Yeah.
And then stage 3 is the major inflection point, a $10 million Series A release for the offline pilot project. This is where you actually put shovels in the ground in Bihar or Nepal and empirically test if the Aadhaar-linked pipeline can deliver a bamboo and mud home without the money leaking.
It's an incredibly aggressive timeline. But anyone who has worked in international development or tech knows the sheer friction involved in pulling this off. This isn't just coding a photo-sharing app in a Palo Alto garage.
Not at all.
This requires moving capital across highly regulated borders, navigating Byzantine bureaucracies, and physically moving dirt. We have to talk about the bottlenecks.
If we connect this blueprint to the harsh reality of the bigger picture, the hurdles are immense. Let's start with the legal friction. The text briefly touches on, but we really need to emphasize, the cross-border regulatory nightmare. If a U.S. foundation is trying to deploy millions of dollars to build homes in India, they slam right into the FCRA regulations.
The Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. For listeners who aren't familiar, can you explain why this is such a massive bottleneck?
The FCRA is a strict Indian law enacted to regulate the acceptance and utilization of foreign contributions by nonprofits and NGOs. The government uses it to ensure foreign money isn't influencing domestic politics or funding illicit activities.
Makes sense.
But in recent years, compliance has become incredibly rigid. NGOs have to maintain specific monitored bank accounts, and getting an FCRA license approved or renewed can take years. If our U.S. PropTech Foundation tries to wire $10 million to a local Indian housing trust, and that trust's FCRA paperwork is delayed, the entire construction pipeline freezes.
Then you have the tech friction, specifically data localization. The model relies entirely on Aadhaar biometrics to prevent corruption. But the Indian government, quite rightly, treats the biometric data of 1 billion citizens as a matter of supreme national security.
Oh, absolutely.
They are absolutely not going to let a U.S.-based tech company freely pull Aadhaar data onto servers in California.
Exactly, which means the tech architecture has to be highly siloed. The U.S. engineers might build the app, but the actual database queries and user data must be localized on Indian servers.
Compliant with India's strict digital privacy laws.
Yes, which makes the software development significantly more complex.
Add to that the financial friction of massive currency fluctuations. You're generating revenue in U.S. dollars and paying for labor in Indian rupees or Nepalese rupees. A sudden swing in Forex rates could wipe out the budget for 1,000 homes overnight.
It's a huge risk.
And then, of course, there's the sheer infamous complexity of Indian real estate laws. Acquiring land, securing clear titles for landless families, navigating local zoning laws, getting construction permits. It is a bureaucratic labyrinth that has stalled traditional developers for decades.
And beyond all the legalities, algorithms, and supply chains, there is a profound cultural hurdle that the blueprint acknowledges.
The aspiration factor.
Yes. For over half a century, the poorest citizens in these regions have been bombarded with a specific narrative of progress.
That concrete is better.
Exactly. They have been told by governments, by media, and by developers that concrete and steel are the ultimate symbols of wealth, stability, and modern dignity, while mud and bamboo are symbols of backwardness, poverty, and rural stagnation.
So even if the mud is better, people don't want it.
Right. Even if the mud home is scientifically superior, cooler, and safer, overcoming that ingrained psychological stigma is massive. The foundation has to engage in a massive cultural marketing campaign to rebrand the Scotty for Buildings approach as an upgrade, as something aspirational, architecturally beautiful, smart, and dignified.
But Pagat argues in the sources that the Kalki Sena Drive experiment in Kathmandu already proved the core thesis. They navigated a tough, high-friction operating environment. They built a highly profitable tech platform competing against global giants, and they successfully routed the surplus to public goods without the system breaking.
Yes, he uses that as the ultimate proof of concept.
The blueprint's central argument is that if you structure the incentives correctly at the corporate level, human ingenuity will overcome the regulatory and cultural friction.
And that is the ultimate synthesis of all these documents. The defining realization here is that the question is no longer whether we have the technology to solve the global housing crisis. We have cutting-edge AI, we have infallible biometric verification, and we have centuries of empirical data proving the efficacy of earthen architecture and bamboo reinforcement. The tools have existed for years.
So what does this all mean? As we wrap up this deep dive, let's look at the massive journey we've just taken. We started by staring down a horrifying statistic. A 30 million home deficit in one of the most populous, climate-vulnerable regions on Earth, driven by a traditional market that only wants to build luxury towers.
Right.
We looked at a radically inventive solution. Reverse engineering a Silicon Valley PropTech startup, creating dual-class equity to solve the founder's dilemma, and building a corporate machine that generates US dollars purely to fund social impact. We moved from the digital precision of biometric ATAR targeting all the way down to the thermal mass physics of rammed earth and the microscopic tensile strength of a bamboo fiber.
The core philosophy underlying every page of this material is a direct structural challenge to modern capitalism.
How so?
It argues that we do not need to destroy the ruthless efficiency of the free market. We simply need to redirect its final destination. It asks if we have the courage and the legal creativity to redesign our business models from the ground up so that profit and purpose are no longer in conflict but are the exact same engine.
And that leaves us with a final, really provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. If we can theoretically take a Silicon Valley real estate tech firm, hardwire its corporate structure, and permanently route its financial upside into building mud and bamboo homes for the absolute poorest citizens in Bihar, what other massive global industries could be completely rewired this way?
That is the ultimate question this deep dive leaves us with.
What if a high-growth U.S. pharmaceutical startup structured its equity so that 100% of its massive U.S. dividends were legally bound to eradicating malaria in sub-Saharan Africa? What if a cutting-edge AI energy grid company hardwired its profits into building decentralized solar infrastructure for off-grid villages in South America?
It's mind-blowing to think about.
What happens to the trajectory of human history if we simply demand that the ultimate shareholder of our greatest technological innovations is the public good?
It changes the entire paradigm of how we build the future.
It brings us right back to that opening image. The gleaming glass boardroom in Silicon Valley and the sun-dried mud in a rural village. They aren't opposite ends of the human experience. If we build the engine right, the boardroom exists only to serve the mud. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.